All right, welcome back to another episode of From the Bench. My name is Brian Rosario, again, assistant coach with Pepperdine University. I'm alongside Tony Perotti, Jesse Clark, and Gavin Peterson talking about communication this week. So before we bring in our guests, we just want to kind of go around the horn and talk about some of the things that are happening, and what's kind of the current events of basketball, current status. So before I do that, I'm going to toss it around to these guys in terms of just saying hello and making a comment.
Hello, everybody. Just saying hello today. Hope everybody's well and staying inside and doing all the right things. Communication is a big one today, and this is a great time to make sure you're maintaining that with everybody that's around you. So stay safe, stay smart, and don't forget to say hello to your friends and others out there.
Hey, everybody from California. We're looking forward to the conversation today. You know, the guys and I have been chatting all week, and it's going to be a fun day of conversation and perspective from three people that I really respect, and then our guests later on today. So looking forward to the conversation, everyone.
How's it going, everybody? Thank you, you guys, for having me again. And, communication is key, especially during these critical times, as it relates to your profession, but also your family life. Don't forget to check in on those loved ones. And it also gives you a lot of time to check in on some of those dear friends that maybe you've lost touch with over the years. I know for me, I've touched base with high school classmates, and it's been kind of fun to do that during this time. So with no other delay, Brian, back to you, man.
Yeah, so one of the hot topics that I'd like to bring up, because it's communication, is obviously we have a lot of moving parts right now, right? There's a coaching carousel there, which is head coach and assistants, but also there's a player carousel. We're in kind of year 2 of this portal thing, and I know, and not to put any programs on blast or anything like that, but I find, in speaking with these players who are wanting to transfer, wanting a new experience, a lot of it does go back to communication with those coaches and the coaching staff that they currently are under. What are you guys' thoughts on the whole portal thing? Obviously, I have my opinions on things, but like, where is communication as it relates to these players looking for new opportunities or different opportunities?
I think when you get down to it, the buzzwords and the conversation you hear about quite often is transactional relationships versus transformational relationships. And I think when you get into recruiting, a lot of times the communication becomes less about maybe the relationship that you're building with a young person or their family or their friend, everyone around them, and much more about trying to get that young person to come to your school and play there. So it turns sometimes into more of a sales pitch. So I think, everybody, all of us have experienced at some point in our life where we've purchased something that we thought was going to be one thing, and we got there or we used it, and turns out it's not really at all what we thought. The salesperson did a heck of a job selling us on it, but it didn't work the way we wanted it to. It didn't fit the needs that maybe we had. And it wasn't a good match for what we were looking for. So what do you do in those cases? I mean, almost always you return the product and look for a new one. Or you just say, wow, this is not for me, and you become unhappy. And then again, you have to make a decision about returning or replacing. So I think that's what turns into what you were talking about with the transfer portal. I think, you get into those thoughts and maybe it's a different priority for you. Another thought that comes with that, Lexi Brown, that played at Duke and then plays in the WNBA now, just recently put out a tweet where she said, sometimes when you're 17 and 18, 16, 17, 18, your priorities are different than when you're at 20, 21, 22. So, I think there's other reasons. There's lots of reasons for that. But again, when you're thinking about transactions versus transformation and relationships, it really boils down to how much communication are you having with your team, with your individual players, and how much time are you spending with them as humans, not as players, not as students, not as anything other than you and them being two human beings sitting down in a room or at a coffee shop or wherever, talking about life and what's going on. So, I think that's one of the issues that happens. And then, I think there's the other side of that, Brian, where you talked about the coaching carousel, where there's a conversation that, okay, when do we tell our players that I'm looking at another job? When as a head coach, do you spring it on them after, 30 seconds before the announcement comes out? Do you let the rumors swirl for a while before you make a decision to sit and talk with your kids? So I think there's questions there and there's thoughts that, when do you have those conversations? When do you talk about all this stuff? And for me, I'm a huge fan of open and honest about everything. Let's have a sit down, talk about it, see how everybody feels about it. Doesn't mean everything's going to go your way all the time, but at least, you're putting it out there and giving people the opportunity to voice opinions, thoughts, concerns. And so, every decision is as informed as it can possibly be on either end of the spectrum. Guys, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting you said. I wanted to drill down on a couple of things that you said there, Tony, in regard to the better relations and the timing and all those kind of things. And you mentioned a couple of things with, the transactional versus transformational stuff. And I just kind of wanted to dive deeper into the kind of a line that I've been hearing when we talk about the portal that you brought up, Brian, is where are the adults in the room sometimes? Tony, you mentioned, 17, 18, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids. And I think a lot of people that get involved in this journey that they're going on are in a transactional nature, from sometimes the parents who want to talk around the water cooler about where their kid goes to school, the club coach who needs that kid to go to this school so that the next kid can come into their club, to the high school coach who's trying to get where they want to be, to the college assistant coach who is trying to get a reputation for getting kids to commit to their school, to the head coach who maybe is looking for the next job. So at some point, where are the adults going, wait a second, why am I doing this? What is my intention with this? And is my job I am recruiting this kid for the sheer nature of me getting what I want next, or for the value of what's best for this kid? And I think that's really, and Brian brought it up just in a vague term, but the numbers are just crazy right now in this transfer portal. And if you start to drill down and, when you start talking to people that are in our profession, that are observers of our profession, I think that's the theme that keeps coming around is I was not getting the same type of communication once I arrived and did my job at that school or was a part of that roster that I got on the way up from everybody that I just mentioned. So, those are just some things that swirl around to me is at some point the adults in the room need to take some accountability. And I feel like the adults in the rooms are the ones that are sitting here wringing their hands about the transfer portal and blaming it on the kids. And I don't know that that's square where it needs to fully sit. So those are my thoughts on it. And Tony, thanks for kind of shooting that off, getting us off going there.
Yeah, we've unfortunately the last couple of years we've had players that were put on the all-freshman Pac-12 team, and for whatever reason they decided to enter their name in the transfer portal. And it caused us, as coaches, to kind of reevaluate what we're doing, what effect it has on our program. And we thought we did have good relationships with those kids, but at the end of the day, were we pouring everything into them? Was our communication as smooth and two-way as it possibly could have been? And, yes, in our opinion, in one case it was, and that kid was going to leave regardless. And in the other case, you have to take a hard look at it and really kind of self-evaluate, and maybe we could have done better. So at the end of the day, the communication piece is so critical. These kids are hearing our sales pitches in high school every day, weekly mailings. The amount of communication going on before they commit to your program is up here. And then as soon as they step on campus, that's when you get put to the test. And were you selling something, a vision, a lot of smoke and mirrors, or is there substance there? And, kids, they're going to want that attention. They're going to want that, not just from the assistant coaches too, but also the head coach as well. You've got to continue to invest and pour into them. Every recruiting coordinator, once they get one class, they move on to the next class. That recruiting coordinator sometimes is not as present as they were in getting the kid to commit. So it's a dynamic where the communication piece, it actually has to get better, and it does have to become more transformational once they step on campus. And I think that's something at Utah we've learned, and we put a lot of effort into that this season. And, I'll throw it back to either Brian or Tony, but maybe it's a topic we can discuss now or in the future. But there is a key component now, and we alluded to it earlier in terms of the retaining part. You recruit, the X's and O's, the strategies, the philosophies. Well, now there's another bullet point in there, and it is a retaining. And Tony, you brought it up off air, but as an administrator, that is a huge component. If I'm looking to hire somebody, what is your plan? What are your strategies? What do you have in place? So you're not playing whack-a-mole and just kind of trying to put out fires. You're ahead of the game when it comes to not just recruiting, but now retaining.
Well, I think that's the interesting thing, right? And I think my perspective is, we are in a transactional job, right? Like we must recruit to get wins. In order for a player to accept a scholarship, they have to accept the fact that they have to go to school, right? And things like that. But I think that's one of the unique things is how do you bring relationships within a transactional world? And I think it's okay to do both. It's okay to speak to the point of, this all starts on a run, on a sprint. There's times when we will get on a player later than other people, and other people have started making that relationship earlier. But I've always said that, I think parents, I think, club coaches, I think college coaches, whoever, to Jesse, your point, right? Adults are adults for a reason. And they are adults because they have a little bit more time and a little bit more experience that they can guide players and guide people younger differently, and I always, players who are looking for a change. I think, it's not that anyone maliciously did bad. They just didn't serve that player the way the player needed. Right. And players change. I think Muffet McGraw said it yesterday, right? Like players adapt, coaches must adapt. But I think the biggest point is, you have two camps, the adults who are with that student athlete prior to college, and then the adults who have them during college. And I think that's the biggest thing of communication is just understanding that, you have to build relationships within this transactional world. I mean, the world's transactional often. And I think the people who build relationships over time are better at serving those players. And I'll just finish with this point and kind of toss it to Tony is, I think in the end, what is the college product? Like, why are we even coaching? Our product is graduates. Right. And along the way, they get to play this cool game and have people in the stands cheering them and whatnot. But the product are those teenagers becoming women. And I think that's the pulse. When players feel that there's a disconnect, it's because the relationship was not built the way they thought it should have been. And that is just a work in progress. I mean, I admire Gavin and your staff is the fact that you had self-awareness to even pivot when things happen like that, and that's what you have to have in order to get better. But, those are just my points in terms of how important communication is to building a relationship in a very transactional world.
Yeah, and I think we can talk about piecing that all together. Like Brian, you're talking about transactions and stuff, and youth, the product, and unfortunately, I don't think everybody's mindset is the same, in such that the product is, graduating citizens into society, that are going to be productive and helpful and good people, moving forward. I think there's, some folks are probably thinking the product is my wins and my money and how much more money can I make, or how much, and unfortunately that's kind of the root of capitalism, right? We're trying to, make as much money as we can for as long as we can. And, and that's a societal issue. So that, but it seeps into everything. So I think there is that idea. And I think that's where you get back to the transaction versus the transformational, is that what is your product? Is your product more money and more status, more power, or is it, trying to create more people with power to move forward? So I think there's a lot of, thought back and forth, and the answer, it probably suits everyone the best, is probably somewhere in the middle. Because you have to be able to, support yourself and such to do this kind of thing. A couple other things we talked about too is that, adults in the room. This is one I always like, and Brian, you made a great point with the fact that, sometimes the adult when you're in high school isn't the same information you need to hear when you're older. I've seen some tweets out there in the last couple of weeks about saying, hey, with this shutdown and people not being able to see you, it's hugely advantageous to have a club coach that's connected and they can, get you at all these places. And when I hear those tweets, it's as if those coaches are saying, you don't get yourself to college, I get you to college. I put you in that place. I put you here. I put you there. And, I'm not sure that's number one for me as a coach. That wouldn't be the relationship I'm looking for, or the transaction that I'm looking for. I don't want to feel like, okay, I got to know the club coach, so now he's going to send me kids, or now she's going to send me kids, or whatnot. But I'm not sure that's, one, the message I would be sending, or the message I would want to hear as a player. And, Gab, you made a great point. What's your plan for retaining kids? I mean, what is your feeling? And I think the point about that whole thing is that the communication that needs to happen, and the question you might want to ask yourself is, if we're sitting in a room with our players, do they feel free to say whatever it is that's on their mind without being punished for it? Are they feeling that they can say whatever they feel and know that they're not going to be retaliated against, they're not going to be talked down to, they're not going to be that way? Everyone treating each other as humans allows you the opportunity to disagree and still show that you care and love. So, I think that's a huge power piece that, I'm not sure all of our student athletes through the years have felt like they can, have that communication and iron out a difference when, they're afraid there may be retaliation because of they feel a certain way. So again, Jess, I don't know how you feel about that, but just a couple of points from what we've just been talking about.
Yeah, I'll throw it to Brian too to kind of wrap up the segment. But no, I think you're hit really just kind of just started to drill down on this, and I think you're right. And it's such a topical thing, and I think we've really touched on some really key components. I love where everybody's perspective. And Gavin, appreciate you kind of being just open about the experience that you guys have gone through. I think that's important for people to hear and go and, hey, here's a Power 5 program drilling down and being reflective on, we made some mistakes and taking some ownership there and going, nope, we did this great, and it was something out of our control. So, I think that's really, really great for people to hear. So let Brian throw it back to you to finish up the segment there.
Well, no, and I think that's the perfect leeway to our guests. We have Betsy Butterick who's coming on, and we will have her next. Stay tuned.
Welcome back, everybody, to From the Bench, a place where we are growing the minds and mostly importantly, the hearts of people in the coaching profession and around. Excited to have a longtime friend, colleague of mine personally, Betsy Butterick, who is a conversation and language specialist, in my opinion. I don't even know if language is in her bio, but if you watch any of her ACT videos online, learning little words that you can use that can make a difference in how you communicate with people. Betsy's elite at that. And so we're super happy to have her join us today and jump on our conversation that we've been having. So Bets, thank you for being here. Appreciate you. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the stuff that you've been drilling down with a little bit during our time here? I know usually you're flying all over the country on a plane and doing sessions, but how is maybe where we're at right now, and maybe talk a little bit about how your work is going and what that kind of looks like right now.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me on, guys. It's great to be here. I love talking hoops, and most of my career as a coach was obviously on the bench. And Jesse, I was thinking about this last night, how when I started at Stanford as the intern with Tara, how I was sitting at the very end of the bench, which when we traveled to Tennessee that year was great because I was dead even with the baseline. And Candace Parker was her senior year, and she dunked from the baseline in that game. And I was, and I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, you're cheering for the wrong team. But it was also such a super cool moment. And then over the course of my career to move up and then, spend the last 7 years in women's basketball sitting next to Heidi. And just, it's such a journey. So obviously this is an unprecedented time. I think that seems to be the most frequent word that I hear when you talk about word choice for the way that sports has responded to this global pandemic. And March 12th will forever be the day that we remember that sports stopped. And that was really when my work picked up in a different way. And the immediate response was, okay, what's needed now? What will be of service? And that was a Thursday, was March 12th. On that Friday, I announced that I was going to do a free webinar for athletic directors and coaches called Game On, a Season of Choice. And I'm really big on perspective and this idea of choices. And knowing that, okay, we didn't have a season and we didn't know how long we were going to be away from our teams. In light of what we couldn't do, what could we choose? What could we do to support our student athletes and to allow our teams to leave their unique mark on this historic time? So the story to be written and the story that coaches and athletic directors and student athletes are writing across our country is not the day that we lost sports anymore, but how did we as individuals respond? Who did we decide to be in this time as programs, as coaches, but also as a global athletic community? And I love that sports really was the first big organization in a way to say, you know what, we'll go first, and to take that leadership position. And, games were stopped at halftime around the country. It wasn't just college sports or high school sports, it was pro sports as well, youth leagues as well. So I think that was really the first time that our country truly started to pay attention to this pandemic, was when sports stopped and everyone's like, wait a second, what is this? But for the athletic community to recognize this is bigger than us and to take that step back allowed, I think, our country as a whole to take a step forward in how we fight this pandemic.
Yeah, that's great. I know that I got on that first session that you did and shared that with some people. It was a really cool 30 minutes that you did there. Just sort of like, I was really raw, it was such a new thing for people. And at that time, I don't know that everyone sort of knew how to manage their emotions at that time. So being really timely with that session was really cool, because I think it spurned a lot of ideas. What was the number you had on that again? I think you had 500, 600, 700.
It was 9. So we went on at 9 a.m. and right before 9 a.m. the number went from 899 to 900. And I'd gotten an email the night before from a coach from South Africa saying, it's going to be like 3 a.m. here. Is there a recording that I can listen to so I don't have to get up? So and I think to that point, Jesse, the number speaks not to anything having to do with me, but from the collective unknown. Like, we don't know what to do. There's no playbook. There's no script for how we get through this time. And the way that leaders within our programs and our universities were looking for, what can we do, in support of our student athletes, who are looking to us to say, so what now? What, that was a really cool experience.
And I think Gav will probably dive into this, but I think what you just said, and because in our first segment, Gav and I talked about the plan and that kind of thing, but just, I thought what you did there was really help maybe just create at least a conversation of a plan. And that was what was so timely and so needed there. So appreciate your work on that, Bets. Gav, I'll turn it to you, man, and let you kind of go into the next thing.
Awesome. Yeah, I part of that webinar that you did on We Coach. Wash your hands and
Yeah,
keep in touch.
stay in touch.
Yes,
Yeah.
no, that was good. And I'm going to kind of use one of your analogies that you talked upon with, some TLC with your kids in your program, but the analogy of a heavy box.
Yep.
You lift from the bottom. And
Yep.
I know I'm guilty of it, where a lot of times you pour a lot into your players who are the most productive. You want to make
Right.
sure that they stay happy. You want to make sure that, you're always, making sure they're being retained. That's the kind of the topic we're just starting to get into. But maybe speak a little bit more on why it is so important, utilizing that analogy, lifting a heavy box from the bottom, because I think all of us coaches, we can see how there is a lot of influence amongst team members. And if you're neglecting a certain number, that's kind of gonna, I think, maybe just get the people, who you're really trying to retain in terms of your top performers. That's going to kind of dilute and get them thinking like, man, these people aren't real. These coaches they only care about one thing, and that's winning.
Right.
When, every person on your roster you recruited at some point, you talk to them about what was going to happen when they got here. And then if those expectations from their perspective aren't met, I think that's kind of where we are right now with this transfer portal and all those type of things. So if you could just speak a little bit more about that analogy and kind of your stories and your methods behind that.
Sure. And I think that's a great point. There's a couple things in what you said, Gavin, that are going on, and at no fault of their own, head coaches especially, or very competitive programs as a staff collectively, need to spend a lot of time and energy and effort focused on those players that are going to make active contributions to help them win games. I mean, we are in the business of winning. Now, there's many components to that business, and depending on what a coach focuses on publicly, knowing that our job as coaches is to put our professional livelihood in the hands of 18 to 22-year-olds roughly, and to help them develop in a way that allows them to perform in certain situations at specific times to get an outcome that our employer is looking for. Now, we know as educators, the added bonus is everything that happens beyond the game and the little moments that we have, those aha moments where people do things in a way they've never done before, or they understand something for the first time and they're able to execute it. So lifting from the bottom, that concept, and on the webinar, I talked about a big box, where it says this end up or fragile. And if it's a big, awkward, clumsy box, you have to get down low and you've got to kind of be intentional about the way that you wrap your arms around it, and then use your legs so you don't throw out your back. I know every sports performance and strength and conditioning coach listening is like, yeah, definitely. So when you think about lifting from the bottom, the same concept in terms of your team, it's very easy. It happens organically that we give a lot of time and energy and attention to our star performers, or those that are going to be seeing minutes or playing time. What we need to be more aware of, the ask here, is for us as coaches, especially as assistant coaches, to be intentional about making sure that we have interactions and touch points with those student athletes who aren't going to get that same kind of attention because their skill level's lower. And this is something that I credit Heidi Vanderveer for. In working together, one of the things I love most about working with Heidi is that every year, our only goal was to make sure that each of our student athletes felt seen, valued, and appreciated regardless of skill level. Did we want to win? Absolutely. But we never talked about winning. We only spoke about opportunities for success, knowing that even if we did everything controllable by us to give ourselves the best chance to win, we might come up against another team that simply had a deeper roster or better players, that there were factors we couldn't control that played into the winning equation. But if we could give ourselves the best opportunity to win, and for us, that meant on a daily basis, making sure that all of our student athletes felt seen, valued, and appreciated, regardless of skill level. The trick in all of this is that when you do that intentionally, you get a whole team of happy people. Happy people tend to give you their best. When you have a whole team of people giving you their best, you tend to win a lot of games. And we did. We won 5 championships in 7 years in 2 different divisions. It's a very simple formula. It's a very effective formula. And what that means is making sure that, and I think this is a great job for assistant coaches. I love doing this job, is intentionally seeking out, who hasn't Heidi talked to, or whoever your head coach is, like who hasn't gotten that kind of touch or attention from that individual, and checking in with them. It can be between drills, it can be before or after practice. It doesn't have to be a long interaction. What matters is that it's an intentional one, where they feel like somebody on the staff came to them and said, "Hey, how's it going?" Or asked about something that they know was happening during their week. Or in this landscape that we're in right now, how's your family? Like, how's your little brother doing? Just asking about things that are unique and specific to them, that are out of the realm of those generic questions that we typically ask, that you could ask to anybody. So how do you see them, and how do you use your language to do that in a way that makes them feel valued and appreciated?
Betsy, I just have admired, we got to know each other when you were a coach, and I love to see how people, not just coaches, but people, you're a person that you made a pivot, and you went in a direction that you obviously saw maybe a void, slash it's your strong suit. I think having those webinars so early, that was almost genius, because you saw a moment where, because you've been there, where this is different. We had to acknowledge we're in a different time right now, but if you backed up, 5, 7, perhaps even 10 years, with communication, what's the evolution of what we've been doing as it relates to a different era and generation of players? We talked about the portal and how, the players I'm talking to, they always refer to communication. And with all the resources out there, why aren't we better at this as coaches?
Great question. I mean, and I think that's what I love about communication, and why I chose it as an area of specialty, is there's no ceiling for how great we can get at communication. It's a skill. Because it's a skill, anybody can develop it. Not only that, but it's always relevant. It will never be irrelevant to have great communication skills. And the way that those skills benefit us in all areas of our life. So if you as an individual, as a person, develop your communication skills, it doesn't just benefit you when you're coaching. It benefits you when you're talking with family and friends and colleagues. It benefits you in your home life and with your relationships with your kids. It's a win-win for everybody. And yet, if you think about, if you were to ask a normal person, "Hey, how much time today did you spend developing your communication skills?" They're like, what? I mean, I talked on the phone a while, or I had this Zoom meeting, but it's like, we tend to only be intentional about our communication when we have something important to say and we want to make sure we get it right. If we were to add a little bit of intention, 5-10 minutes a day, to working on developing these skills, the results that we would see, everything becomes easier when we have effective communication, or when we're able to better avoid or identify miscommunication. Skilled communicators really are the leaders of the future. And I think when you say this generation, they all cite communication. This generation, and we're fully in coaching Generation Z now, so they've been raised with technology in a way that previous generations have never known. And we tend to think of them as maybe a little more autonomous or lacking social skills, but they've been communicating in nuanced ways related to technology with more people than we ever came in contact with when we were growing up. So when they say they value communication, they do. It might look a little different from what we were used to, but when you ask Brian, you say, scale it back. What's interesting is I run continuously into coaches or programs where, especially if the head coach has been in it for a while, regardless of sport, they are now challenged to adapt and evolve and change to meet the needs of the younger generation. What worked when they were being coached no longer works with kids these days. And that's really the big difference between the evolution we're seeing nationwide now in sport, of this transition from transactional coaching to transformational coaching. And language is a big part of that. So no longer is it enough to say, I'm the head coach, you're the student athlete, you're getting scholarship, I'm in charge, it's my way or the highway. You will do these things because you're being given this spot on the roster, or this opportunity to play, or this education. Now it's much more about developing the whole person and having a relationship. So it's, if we scale it back, it's the difference between as a coach talking at our athletes, and now as a coach talking with our athletes. And part of the nuance of Gen Z is they love to co-create. They're highly collaborative as a generation. So using language as the tool to help them co-create their sport experience, to give them greater agency and ownership in what this is that they're doing as part of our program, what this is as they develop as an individual relative to their sport, but more so relative to what they're going to do in their life after sport. And that involves communication.
Hey, Betsy, I would agree with you 100%. I had a little bit of experience with what you're just talking about when I was interim at Albany. I kind of took over and just said, hey, I'm going to, do this the way I want to do it. And a lot of it was asking the players, hey, how do you feel about this? This is kind of what I'm thinking. How do you feel? And kind of gave them some ownership into that. And then, just kind of went from there. And but I agree with you. I think that whole process of talking to your players and develop relationships, because I think the questions that you were just saying that you pop around practice and ask them had nothing to do with basketball.
Right.
Had nothing to do with school. Had everything to do with them as human beings.
Right.
So I guess with all of that, what would be, if I'm putting together my happiness plan for my team, what would be some things that I would want in that plan as I go forward and try to incorporate that into my daily routine running a team?
Yeah, great question. And that I want to back up and double click on something that you said. And I love that you're intentional about asking the student athletes, how do you feel? Great question. And it comes from a place of pure intention. Where we miss a step sometimes is when we ask student athletes in particular how they feel, we're making an assumption that they have a robust enough emotional vocabulary to accurately tell us what it is that's going on for them internally. So this is going to vary for each of your student athletes. If they haven't had, maybe they come from a family background where emotions were not discussed often, or they were encouraged to only express certain emotions, their language around how they feel is going to be limited. Whereas, if you come from a family that freely talks about what they feel, they're going to have a higher emotional vocabulary and be better able to perhaps articulate to us accurately what it is that they feel. So I don't want to discourage any coach from asking their student athletes how they feel. It's a great question. What I'm asking here is for people to be intentional about the language that they use so they get more of the information they're looking for. Sometimes when we say, how do you feel? We tend to go to the spectrum end. So happy, sad, good, bad, right, wrong, that kind of thing. When we ask somebody, tell me about your experience, then we may get into more of the information that we're looking for separate from feelings, because they can have a really valuable experience, but feel differently about it because of things maybe like playing time. You know what I mean? So using language intentionally to get the information that we're looking for. If you're going to build your own happiness kit, and there's a distinction that I love making, and it's between happiness and joy. When people talk about joy, I pay attention, because joy for me is a different level of happiness. Joy is more of an experience. It's more of a climate as opposed to like a passing weather system, because happy tends to feel like this. Joy is more, for me, a constant state and it's felt in a deeper place than happiness. Happiness, especially in sports, can fluctuate on a variety of variables. If you have joy, that speaks to me to a deep love for the game. Yes, it'll make you happy, but the process is joyful. So if we're developing our happiness kit, or we really want to get at that joy element, one thing that I would encourage coaches to ask in everything that they do, before you give anything to your student athletes, before you write anything into your practice plan, is to ask yourself the question, for the sake of what? What's my purpose here? What's my why? If you know what that is, and you understand explicitly the value that you're adding, or the reason behind what it is that you're asking your student athletes to do, acting from that place of purpose is something that is a great starting point for generating overall happiness or well-being. When we're taking purposeful action in the lives of young people, and we're helping them work towards a bigger outcome or purpose or goal, that's a place where happiness and ultimately joy can source from.
I like what you said there.
We can talk about this all day.
No, I mean, I like it a lot. I think what you're saying there is kind of what I was trying to get at with those guys, was to say, like, is this comfortable? Is this going to be something that is not going to cause you anger or make you upset or whatever? Is this going to help you be happy and joyful and love what you're doing? And I agree with you on that big time. So anyway, Jess, what do you got for me?
Well, can I talk one more thing about, okay, you mentioned that comfortable thing. And this is a big deal that it's important to understand for coaches working with today's student athletes, is for many of them, based on either the type of parents that they had or the way that they've interacted with technology, there is a blurred line between something being unknown and something feeling unsafe. So if you think about the digital age, if there's something they don't know, they can Google it. If they want to learn a new skill, they can pull up YouTube videos, and in 5 minutes, they have a better understanding. When we're faced with something like a global pandemic, which we haven't experienced before, it's very easy for the unknown to feel unsafe. Scale that back to if we were in, let's say, 2 months ago and having normal practices. Anytime there's something that student athletes today don't know, it's very easy for them to feel like this is unsafe. And as coaches, it's important that we are able to help them sit with the unknown and be with the unknown while feeling safe and supported. And we can use language to do that. But that's a big difference that I think sometimes we get into trouble with when we talk about like comfort levels. Someone will be uncomfortable and they'll be fearful, or they'll feel like they need to do something, whether it's, file a complaint or something like that, because they're not used to feeling or being or staying in this place of the unknown. When you talk about the transfer portal, like they don't know if they're going to play next year or not. And it's scary. So I'm going to enter the transfer portal because this coach is telling me that I'm going to play, and that's a known outcome versus an unknown. Where if I could sit in the unknown of my playing time in the future and spend that time working intentionally on my development, then I might feel safer to stay, if that makes sense. Yeah.
No, totally. Man, guys, I don't know about you, but I'm got nuggets all over the place. There's recruiting tips in here that are dripping out of her mouth right now. There's so much good stuff. I love the idea that you mentioned, to Tony's point about just little words that you can tweak to get what you want. And I referenced them in the intro, but if you haven't caught Betsy's, she calls them her act videos, but if you haven't caught them, I recommend them. They're little nuggets, and every time it's like a language bomb that she drops every time she puts out one of those. I'm like blown away. I'm like, oh my God, this is so simple. Why do we not have this? So Betsy, thank you for being such an amazing resource for us. I want to kind of circle back my question, and this is going to be more about an intentional and purposeful thing, back to the question that Gav brought up with lifting the heavy box. And I think there's an art to, in a word that we used in our first segment, of being patronizing a little bit, but like when we celebrate or we are purposeful about those kids at the end of the bench, that to Gav's example of, we need to make sure we're lifting them up because we need the kids at the front of the bench, so to speak, to know that their teammates are being as supported as they are. Do we celebrate all those little moments in a way, and how do we celebrate those little moments in a way that we don't become patronizing to say kids that are at the bench? Because Tony made a point in our first segment about, every kid smells the BS a little bit, right? And so it's like you don't want to sit here and we're in the circle at the end of practice and going, oh yeah, so-and-so who's playing no minutes a game, but she did something really cool in practice, and so we really want to acknowledge that, which is important. But yet how do we do that without being patronizing is really, at the end of the day, I think the question, just to kind of circle back to I think a point that Gav touched on, that was, I think, really, really important.
For sure. And this is really important. I mean, when you say they can smell the BS a mile away, it doesn't work to simply pat them on the head and say good job and send them off. It's got to be authentic, and ideally it's in the moment. So one thing, and Sue Enquist is a friend of mine, and we talk often about, what it was like for her as a player and then as a coach, and the things she would do differently from the beginning of her career to the end of her career. But one thing that stuck with me from an early conversation that I had with her is, Bets, as coaches, we've got to catch them doing it right. And especially when you talk about high performing teams or expectations around skills, it's like, well, or coaching college, you should be able to execute this skill at a high level, especially with your sort of end of the bench players, or that group that you need to do some lifting from the bottom with. When you catch them doing something or executing something in a way that you want to see more of as a program, name it. And then if you can, name it publicly, because this generation has that, they place a disproportionate amount of value on extrinsic motivation. And so, think about likes on social media and that validation from others. So if you're able to publicly acknowledge and celebrate something that one of your lifting from the bottom type players has done in the moment, extremely powerful. When we talk about authenticity, because don't just, I mean, and I hesitate to say don't because I always talk about rephrasing in the positive. I would advise you to stay away from saying something that is a stretch. Like if it feels like a stretch to you, it's going to sound like a stretch to them. So finding something that is organic, authentic, it doesn't have to be every day. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. This is where we get to be creative and look for opportunities to find value. So let's say one of your student athletes, who's kind of that lift to the bottom bunch, is bringing out the ball rack, for practice. Simply saying, hey, thanks for bringing out the ball rack. I appreciate it. To them individually, that's a win. That's a touch point. That's lifting from the bottom. So looking for opportunities with those individuals, maybe outside of a drill or practice, to acknowledge something and to express gratitude. I mean, gratitude is like the secret sauce, and authentic gratitude carries so much value into the future. As far as you might thank them for something specific once, and they're going to feel that for the next couple of days. Little nuances. We talk about language, Jess, and the way that we can make small shifts. And the ACT videos that Jesse mentioned, ACT stands for Active Communication Technique. Those are all on YouTube. There's 30 of them currently, and one comes out ideally every 2 weeks or so. Sometimes I get a little behind schedule, but they're 2-minute or less videos that anybody can use, something you can do today to improve the way you communicate and connect with others. When we talk about lifting from the bottom, small shifts in language, and one of those is simply inserting their name. So Jesse, if you brought the balls out, instead of saying, thanks, I appreciate it, I'd say like, Jesse, thanks for bringing the balls out. I really appreciate it. Anytime you can use their name, it feels more personal. Now, you might be the only person around. It's just you, me, and the ball rack. So clearly I'm talking to you, Jess, but saying your name levels up the communication a little bit and makes it stickier. It makes it more impactful in terms of the felt impact that my words have on an individual. So if you can, name it in the moment. If you can name it publicly, celebrate the behavior that you want to see more of, regardless of who it comes from on your team. Get specific instead of just thank you, saying thank you with their name, saying thank you plus the specific action that you're grateful for and their name. That's the third level, or kind of the deepest impact that you can have.
That's good stuff. Thank you, Bets, for that. Just 3 quick tips, man. People are going to love that, and just, and it just, if you're trying to really grow yourself in that way, those are just 3 bullet points that we all can dive into and just make almost part of our daily life. I mean, those of us
practice
that are
makes perfect. It's a skill.
Those are parents, we probably do that too, and I think sometimes we even forget with our own kids is, just to be intentional about our communication with them and raising them up to be brilliant people. Tony, I know you want to follow up on something, so I'm going to throw it back to you real quick.
Yeah, actually, we talked about this yesterday when we were talking about Betsy being on, and one of the things I saw your tweet about, I don't like getting yelled at, and at some point we equated yelling with love. Now,
Right.
My personal experience comes from Pat Summit. I was a practice player for her, so she was my mentor in the game, and we all know how intense and tough and how she was with her players, but I think people sometimes miss the fact that all of her players called her Pat. Her name was not Coach, it was Pat. And the love that those kids have always shown to her, I think, is a demonstration of how well she did cultivating intentional relationships with them away from basketball.
Yep.
So if you could just kind of talk about the yelling versus, whether or not that's love, or what our perception of that.
And it's interesting. I appreciate you bringing that up, Tony, because if I had to go back, I would rewrite that tweet, and I wish we had more characters to use, because when I mentioned yelling, the more specific context is elevated voice that's constant. So it's not yelling for a specific purpose or reason. It's a constant elevated volume, which involves a word choice that is centered around degradation, shame, embarrassment, deconstruction. So when you talk about tough love, and this was really meant to generate, that tweet was meant to generate a larger discussion around what tough love is, when it's successful and why it's successful, and when it's not. So in talking with student athletes, what often comes up for me, and this is males and females, is they will say that, I'm okay with coach yelling at me because I know that means that they care. Or that coach, losing their shit on them, for lack of a better term, means that they must be doing something right, or else coach wouldn't bother to spend that kind of energy. And I think back to growing up and watching Love and Basketball, and that line where, the coach says, "You think I go horse for a player with no potential?" It's like, that was a generational thing where those coaches had been coached that way. And it's kind of the classic football coach mentality, for lack of a better term, but to bring it into context. And the way that has some value, and there's a leveling off point where, especially with today's student athlete, okay, they might know that you care. And I hear this is interesting too, I think, when we talk about men's sports, where oftentimes male coaches have said that they think the way to be most effective with the young men that they're coaching is to piss them off and to make them angry, because they play better when they're angry. And so they're trying to double click on this passion and this anger and this heightened emotion to hopefully have that translate constructively into a better performance. Here's the interesting thing. When we talk about yelling, and I'll offer two analogies here. The first is when we yell at someone and it's loud, instinctively, if you do this to a young child, they're going to cover their ears, they're going to back up, right? If you whisper, same thing, young child, but adults as well. If you whisper and you lower your voice, people have to lean in and come closer in order to hear you. Over time, that's the exact same thing that happens with these relationships in a coaching context. The more you yell, the further away your players are going to go over time, and they're going to tune you out because it's always at the same volume. So it's lost its effectiveness. Did I yell as a coach? Absolutely. And I'm a softer spoken individual. Every player I ever coached can tell you about the time that I yelled, because I didn't do it often, but when I did, it really mattered. And they can tell you today exactly what it was that I lost my shit about, because doing it for a reason. Same thing with swearing. I believe in swearing for effect, instead of, if you use it constantly, it's like, come on, use your adult language, like choose a better word. So thinking about this idea of when we lower our voice, people have to lean in and pay closer attention to when we yell, we're pushing them away. The other thing that I wanted to bring into this context is that if you think about on a biological level, the fight or flight response, when we feel threatened, when we feel like our safety is at risk, the blood flow leaves our brain and goes towards our extremities so that we can do either fight or flight. So hands for fighting, feet for running away. If we want our student athletes in the moment in their respective sport to perform better, they need to be able to think. So if we're yelling at them or berating them or we're making them feel unsafe, they are resorting internally, biologically, to a fight or flight response, and they are less able to think rationally and in a way that would provide strategic performance in the moment. So if we want to get more of what we want, which is high performance from our athletes in the moment, it doesn't benefit us long-term to act in that manner of, getting angry or losing it on a player, hoping that they're going to play better or that we're going to make a memorable point. If we can instead tell them what they need to know, what they did wrong, specifically how they can fix it, and what we need to see from them in the future. And the other part of this is know your audience. So there's certain student athletes that, they respond really well to that kind of in-your-face coaching. There's other student athletes that if we try to do a one-size-fits-all, they get so far shut down that now we can't reach them. And it might take several days or weeks to get them back to a level that they can positively contribute for the team. So know your audience, do what's effective in the moment. But long-term, when we think about the purpose, like we asked that question for the sake of what, if you're that kind of coach that typically resorts to a motivational style that's very angry or in your face or getting on kids, think about what effect is it having, and could you have a greater impact in terms of your long-term goals of player performance if you were to vary your style or use a different style? That's the ask here.
I think that is a really good way to clarify that whole thing, because I know in my personal experience, I will yell. But again, I try to make sure that the time that I spend with each kid lets me know whether or not they're going to handle that in I guess the response that I hope that they're going to have.
And that's the important part, Tony, is that if you're going to use that as a motivational style or as your preferred coaching style, it has to be supported. Like the tough love piece has two pieces. Mm-hmm. Sometimes coaches just focus on the tough and think that that's going to equate to the love because, of course, they love them or else they wouldn't, go horse for a player with no potential. Unless you actively show that love outside of that moment in the game or outside of practice, if you're not having the conversations that allow that individual to know that you do care about them, the tough part doesn't work as well. It has to have the balance. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Betsy. That was awesome.
Yeah. Of course.
That's, man, you're literally, it's incredible right now. I know I can see everybody's got their pen in hand and are just dropping nuggets and writing stuff down. So, and I think this time is so important that we've had to almost professionally learn and get deeper into what we do. And you know, sort of the goal with our group here is to sort of give people tools to be in this profession for as long as the four of us have been lucky enough to be around it. And that was really the mission of what we're doing here. So thank you so much for, I think, giving not only the four of us, but I mean, everybody who's going to watch this, some just nuggets to get better at our craft. I want to touch on one thing and then we'll wrap up. I know, really appreciate your time. And maybe this is probably for another topic that we want to get into, but just can you briefly sort of talk about some of your work that you do in this area with coaching staffs? We've talked a lot about that communication and language piece with us to Gen Z and our players, but maybe just touch on a little bit, there's probably a lot of the same tools, but again, it's a different dynamic. So can you just touch on that and then we'll wrap up after that. But because I know you do a lot of work with not just this player coach thing. You do it more on a dynamic level with business, with coaching staffs, etc. So maybe touch on a couple key things there that maybe coaching staffs can take, and then we'll wrap up on the backside.
Sure. And you're talking about my favorite way to work, Jesse. My favorite thing to do is when I get contacted either by an athletic department or a staff, and they say, hey, we want to be more intentional about our communication as a program. And what I'll do in terms of a comprehensive program with a sports team is I'll go on site and I'll observe training sessions. So I'll typically spend the first day observing practice. I'll meet with their coaching staff and we'll debrief the notes that I took from practice. So when you said this, tell me what purpose you were saying that for, or when you said it this way, if you said it this way, you might get more of the result that you're looking for. So really breaking down the language that coaches are using in practice, and also taking notes on how the players are talking with each other, with the coaches, the way that, what is the language of your program? And each program has its own language specific to the way that they use certain terminology relative to their sport, to the different coaching styles that each of the coaches exhibit, to the ways that the athletes respond, especially international athletes. It's fascinating when I work with teams that have a variety of athletes from different places and different cultures, the way that those communication nuances happen. There's individuals who respond very well to blunt communication and are also blunt communicators with their teammates, and have teammates that do not respond well to that kind of communication. So being able to observe organically what's true for your program. And then the goal always is, how can we get more of what you want as coaches while improving the quality of the student athlete experience? Doing that through language. So typically I'll watch training sessions, weight sessions, I'll meet with the staff, we'll debrief what happened. And then the next day I'll do 1 or 2 workshops with the team, specifically around communication. So championship communication is a common workshop that I do often. A lot of the workshops that I do with women's teams specifically are on the topic of confrontation for connection. How do we have the difficult conversations that many women's teams will say, we need to hold each other accountable, or there's conversations we're not having because people are worried that it's going to injure the relationship. And, our team is great and they're really good friends. And so because they're really good friends, they're a little softer on each other with the things that need to be talked about for us to move forward, but they're worried that they're going to harm the relationship. So how do we have those conversations in a way that builds trust and relationship? But I'll work specifically with teams on whatever is most important to them. So it typically starts with meeting with their staff, or at least the head coach, and saying, tell me what's most important for you coming up this season. And where do you think the barriers lie to you achieving those results? And then how can we use language intentionally to help you overcome some of those or to get more of what you want? I love doing that kind of work. It's different every time. Sometimes it'll involve meeting with the individual student athletes. And that's where the executive coaching part comes in, of me being able to have a conversation with an individual student athlete and talk about whatever is most important to them, and to give them some tools and resources. The goal with the work that I do is to work myself out of a job as quickly as possible. So to leave the coaching staff and the student athletes able to self-generate and self-correct. So if they realize that they're not getting the result that they want, how do they scale back and then take a look at their language and what they're doing and how they're behaving, and then make adjustments that allow them to move forward in a way that's more positive and productive. So that's the work that I get to do. And I love it. I'm so fortunate to be part of many teams. I miss coaching one team, you know, like especially as an assistant, having that relationship. I love the off season, the individual work where you help somebody get better, someone who really wanted to improve. I now get to do that work with individual coaches, with coaching staffs, and with programs and departments as a whole. And I feel so fortunate to get to do the work that I do.
Man, I appreciate it. And we're going to have you back on to dig deeper into some of that stuff for sure and talk more about what there. Really appreciate that. Talk about really quick, where can people hit you up? Where do you want people to go? How do they get in contact with you? And what's the best way to do that? What do you like to respond to, and how can people reach out?
I like to respond to people. So if you reach out, you will likely get a response. You can follow me on Twitter at Betsy Butterick. You can follow me on Instagram at Betsy_the coach's coach. All of my social media you can link to from betsybutterick.com. There's a contact form on the website if you want to fill it out. That's the easiest way to connect with me. And then the ACT videos on YouTube, if you search Betsy Butterick, you can subscribe. There's 30 ACT videos there. The Season of Choice, Game On a Season of Choice webinar is also there. There's also a webinar that I did for Huddle, and it's 5 tips to have more connective conversations, especially in the virtual landscape that we're doing right now. If we can use language, and we can, which is why it's so cool, using language to create stronger connections even when we're at a distance. And then on the website as well, I have a course that just came out in January. It's my first digital course. It's roughly 3.5 hours long. It includes over 100 videos plus worksheets that are tailored for your individual team to help coaches improve their communication. It's called Winning with Words, Championship Communication for Coaches. The feedback has been phenomenal. And they always say with your first course, don't try to put everything in there. And I tried and I couldn't, because it matters too much. It's a skill. Anybody can do it. And when we're intentional about our communication, we increase our opportunities for success and we increase the quality of the student athlete experience. It's a win-win. So if that interests you, check it out, especially in this time where we're not with our teams. How can we as coaches get better so that we can be better for those that we serve?
Betsy, thank you so much. I know the 4 of us are fired up. You've inspired us today. And I know when people see this, they're going to feel your passion, your energy. And I know we'll have you back on down the road to drill down on some more of this stuff. But thank you so much for your time. And I know you probably have got 7,000 other of these today, but really thank you for giving us some of your time. And you and Tony can talk New York stuff later, but we'll look forward to talking to you again. Thanks so much, Bets.
Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to coming back on with you, but I appreciate you having me on. Stay safe and well, and wash your hands.
Thanks again for watching. Please don't forget to click subscribe so you don't miss any of our content. Now back to segment 3.
Thanks everybody for coming back with us. We want to thank Betsy Butterick for coming in and just really enlightening all of us on how we can use communication and how we use our language intentionally in our communication to get our point across, as well as receive information, in the best possible way. I know we were just during the break talking a little bit about how, not just today, but very importantly today, but also other, information that we're receiving, other podcasts, other, talks, anything that we're picking up here in this time, is it just something that we're doing to write notes and say we did it? Or are we actually taking the time to self-inventory, self-evaluate? Are we really learning something from this? Are we looking at ourselves as we bring in all this information and procure this information? Are we really using it to critique ourselves and find a way to make ourselves better? Or are we just doing it to, post on Twitter that, hey, we did this and, come watch us, or, hey, I participated or whatnot. But, the value of this stuff is great, but it's only at its ultimate value if you're willing to use it to critique yourself and find out maybe where you're at in the whole grand scheme.
Yeah, I truly believe I am a better coach than I was an hour ago. Like I really, a lot of the things Betsy was saying was speaking to, recent experiences, especially for me with just a player on our roster in which I was, trying to get the best out of her, trying to connect with her, not necessarily tough love, but it was a loud presence, right? I'm our defensive coordinator. I work with her in position. So I'm trying to get the most out of her, and being a loud voice isn't necessarily going to get the best out of a kid. It really struck a chord with me when she said, they hear loud noises, they back up, and then it's fight or flight. And those kids need to be allowed to think, to get through that. So it's changed me just within this hour, and now I feel a lot more prepared. I'm going to be intentional, and I truly believe I'll get through to this player that I wasn't able to get through to this past season. So I agree, Tony. It's great that people are, listening to podcasts, webinar, and writing things down, but are they just notes in a notebook, or are you kind of applying them? So that's the challenge, I think, to all of us. And I thank Betsy for sharing with us, because I did get better today. So that was awesome.
I know too. I think I mentioned it during while she was on, just even of thinking the purposeful actions that are so easy. And I hope people, if, and I think we all probably had a nugget that we go, man, I will immediately, and like, to your point, Gav, like, I'm going to use that whispering technique with this kid more often than I'm going to use the yelling technique, because maybe now when I do yell at her, she's going to it's going to be like, done, I'm in, because of the whisper part of the conversation that you've had, and how you'll handle that, how you feel best with her. But that's just really cool. I mean, I even mentioned, I think during her segment, with just, even with my own son, some of these things, like, he's 15 now, and we'll talk about stuff, and he literally goes silent, and it's like, it's the most frustrating thing, and sometimes, but for me, it was the idea of, I'm trying to probably get how he's feeling about it, and yet maybe I need to just have him share what his experience was, and through that conversation, I'm going to glean, because as we referenced segment 1, the line, I'm the adult in the room, I'm a little more experienced about what the feelings are. And so to be able to, like, maybe him sharing what his experience with what he just went through, I can get to what he's actually feeling. Whereas he's freaking 15-year-old dude, like, he does not equipped to articulate that stuff, and it's like, and so that was really mind blowing to me. So when we talk about application, I'm like, man, I'm gonna be a better parent right now because of this thing. So, so I mean, that's sort of my lot. And I Tony, I love it too. I think that I've challenged people, and I want people that watch this to be challenged, to look inside yourself and be willing to get vulnerable. And all these notes you've been taking, whether it's player development, whether it's scouting, whether it's communication, please, like, that is why the 4 of us have been around this business as long as we have. Because to Gavin's point, he goes, I got better today than I was, an hour ago. To be able to say that to yourself is the critical thing, versus sending out a tweet like, oh, I was on that thing today. And that's the challenge I want to lay down for people. And I don't want that to be missed either, that Gav just opened up and said, hey, that's what I'm doing here. That's why, and again, that's why we've all been around this sport for so long.
Well, I think that's I mean, we haven't talked about this. I mean, this is our project. This is our experiment. This is us trying to grow the bench. And I love the reference that Betsy did, right? Like, she started down at the end of the bench, right? And all of a sudden, in your career, you start moving chairs. And this whole thing is literally about how can you have the self-awareness that, Gavin and his staff practiced, right? Like there are certain things that we might not be writing down at this point in our career, but I think communication is one of those things that you have to be, you got to be tapping into something different along your career, because it's not the same, and I've never been a yeller. And I mean, when I was coaching Chandler Gilbert, like, those players, like, when are you going to yell at us? I'm like, I don't know. Like, because I had great mentors. I mean, I'm from the coaching tree of Kathy Marpy down at University of San Diego with Eric Johnson, them. And what they showed me, it was showing first, not even just telling, but like, they had relationships with those players, and the relational side of things is so important. And I've always said that, you can't be more critical than the depth of the relationship, right? Because once you get past that threshold, now it's kind of like, why are you coming at me? Or that, there's some misunderstanding type of thing. But I think communication is one of those things that no matter what chair you're in, that it's a constant barometer. Players will always tell you where you stand. And if you really want to build something up, you almost have to show them and have that like slow drip, right? Like at some point, the slow drip fills the glass. And at the end of it, you can always change relationships, but it's done over time. And there's no end game, really. You just got to be able to do it and show it. But I think that's, Tony, to your point, right? Like, are we going to practice what we learned? I mean, I know like there was already players in my head that I'm like, okay, once I'm off this, I'm texting,
yeah, right. No, immediately. No, and I think that's, for me, it's a big keyword is critical thought. I'm constantly pushing thought on people. Break that down, think about it more, push yourself a little bit. And I think that's a big part of basketball. If you think about it on a we try to prepare our players for all kinds of things, right? But ultimately, the game is played so fast that they've got to make quick decisions that we may not have prepared them for. Somebody might do something we didn't know, but if you're not thinking constantly about what you're doing or being engaged mentally, then it's difficult to make those decisions in a positive way when you're not preparing yourself. So one of the things that Betsy got me thinking about was there's things you can do during this time. Why not have a chalk talk like with your team, like in a sense of not plays, but a glossary of terms. What terms do you use with your team every day? When you draw up plays, do they know what everything means? When you say, can you send them like a picture message of, hey, I call this a cross screen, or I call this a flex screen, or I call this a shuffle screen, or I call that, and draw it for them and give it to them and say, hey guys, here's the glossary of how we talk during games. This is our vocabulary or practice. This is our, this is how we refer to these things. So now when you're in practice and you're going, hey, we're going to run a shuffle screen here to a flex screen there, and they look at you like you have 9 heads and you're befuddled because they don't understand these things. Well, did you give them the tools to understand what the hell you're talking about? It's just something that, I guess when we talk about these things about the intentional communication, it's great to have it, but if they don't know what the hell you're talking about, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
No, it's interesting. I just, what you just said, Tony, I wonder a thing that maybe, we're talking about taking notes, but the idea of the meeting, the virtual meeting that we're having with our teams, I think the forward-thinking coaches will keep doing this moving forward, right? Like if you are doing these kind of meetings with your team now, like let's say they've all gone away for their little bit of a break, and not that we want to be in their business all the time, but let's do one Zoom meeting while everybody's away before we come back for summer training, and to maybe do exactly what you're saying, Tony. Like, hey, you know what, the staff, we all met, let's do a term review. That way when we come back from break before we start summer workouts, or maybe we've had summer workouts and we're on our break, whatever, I just using this technique, and especially with maybe coaches that this is new technology to some of us that like we're, will we carry this through? Well, as assistant, I love one of her points too, as assistant coaches, like take note of which head coach hasn't touched one of these players and help and make sure you're helping do that. Maybe that's another job as an assistant coach, in your being proactive and helping your head coach. Let's do that. Like Tony, it's a great suggestion, or whatever it is, having a conversation about, spacing and what that looks like. And you literally put up the video and then you get on and have a conversation as a team, will we keep using Zoom technology or FaceTime or whatever it is to get deeper in our communication with our players? Like we're all using it. Who's doing Zoom? Do we keep seeing tweets of the Zoom meeting, right? A year from now? Are we doing that when this is really in our wheelhouse? Maybe even when we're, you know, we're all, because now we can connect, right? You could have a kid from Australia be on the same call as your kid from Florida, as your kid that lives around the corner, and you all really get to be in the same room. So I think that's like almost an unspoken thing that we're learning how to do. So just a thought as Tony's talking right there that I had on, you know, to add to the list of things that we're doing, and will we keep using them on a deeper level?
I'm just going to finish my last thought. I'm going to steal one of her quotes. Gratitude is the secret sauce. And I'm just thankful for, again, this platform here, the number of years invested into the game of women's basketball from all of us, Betsy included, Rachel in the past, all those experiences. Not all are successful experiences. I know, speaking for my behalf, I've learned a lot in the shortcomings, and I'm learning from other people's shortcomings. So it's, again, I'm just thankful for this opportunity. I'm just thankful for every day in which I get to do what I love to do and continue to learn. I mean, the day I stop learning is the day I need to go find and do something else. So, but it was a great segment today. It was awesome.
Sure, for sure.
Well, and I think that'll close us up. We definitely appreciate you being on with us. Join us next week from the bench. See you soon.